The hunger clawed at Delilah Harper's insides like a wild animal as she held her 8-year-old daughter's trembling hand. The merciless Arizona sun beating down on them as they stumbled into the dusty streets of Naco in the summer of 1878. 3 days without proper food had left her dizzy, her once fine dress hanging loose on her frame, while little Emma's cheeks had lost their usual rosy glow. "Just a little further, sweetheart," Delilah whispered, though she had no destination in mind. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead for 6 months, taken by the same fever that had claimed so many others in their Kansas hometown. With creditors seizing their modest home and belongings, she'd scraped together what little money remained for train tickets west, chasing a cousin's vague promise of work that had evaporated upon their arrival. The journey had depleted their meager savings faster than she'd anticipated. Now, as they passed the general store, the smell of fresh bread made Emma whimper with longing. Delilah's vision blurred, whether from hunger or unshed tears she couldn't tell, and she stumbled, catching herself against a hitching post. "Madam, you all right there?" The voice came from somewhere above her, deep and concerned. Delilah tried to straighten, to summon whatever dignity remained, but her knees buckled. Strong hands caught her before she hit the dirt. "I'm fine," she lied, even as dark spots danced across her vision. "Just the heat." Through her haze, she saw a man crouching before Emma, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Your mama needs some help, little lady. So do you, I reckon." "We don't need charity," Delilah managed, though her parched throat made the words come out as barely more than a rasp. The man stood, and she got her first clear look at him, tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore simple clothes, dusty from the trail but clean. A cowboy by the look of him, with none of the dangerous edge she'd come to fear in some of the men they'd encountered on their journey. "It ain't charity to feed a hungry child," he said simply. "Or her mother. Name's Daniel Morgan. I've got a place just outside town. Nothing fancy, but there's food and shade." He glanced at Emma's pale face. "And I reckon neither of you is in any condition to argue about it." Before Delilah could summon another protest, he'd whistled for a boy loitering nearby. "Jimmy, run to Doc Williams. Tell him we've got a woman and child suffering from heat and hunger. Have him meet us at my place." He pressed a coin into the boy's hand, and the youngster darted off. "I can't pay you," Delilah said, hating the weakness in her voice. Daniel Morgan's expression softened. "Nobody's asking you to." He lifted Emma easily, the child too exhausted to protest, then offered his free arm to Delilah. "Let me help you both, please." In that moment, with her daughter limp in a stranger's arms and her own body betraying her, pride seemed a luxury she could no longer afford. Delilah nodded once and took his arm, letting this unexpected savior lead them toward whatever fate awaited. The wagon ride to Daniel Morgan's ranch was mercifully brief, though to Delilah it seemed to stretch endlessly as she fought to stay conscious. She sat beside Daniel on the driver's bench, Emma cradled in her lap, the child's breathing shallow but steady. "Not much further now," Daniel said, his voice low and reassuring as they turned onto a narrow dirt path leading away from the main road. "My place isn't grand, but it's solid. Built it myself after the war." Delilah wanted to ask which war, wanted to know more about this man who had appeared like some guardian angel in their darkest hour, but her tongue felt too heavy to form the words. The ranch came into view around a bend, a modest house built of sturdy timber and stone, with a barn and corral nearby. A few cattle grazed in the distance, and chickens scratched in the yard. It wasn't large compared to some of the spreads she'd glimpsed on their journey, but it was well maintained, with vegetable gardens visible behind the house. "Home," Daniel said simply, pulling the wagon to a stop. He jumped down and came around to help them. "Let's get you both inside and cooled down." The interior of the house was blessedly cool after the punishing heat outside. Daniel led them to a small bedroom and helped Delilah settle Emma on a clean, simple bed. "Rest here. I'll fetch some water and something light to eat." He paused at the door. "Doctor should be here soon. He's a good man." Alone with her daughter, Delilah smoothed Emma's hair back from her forehead, noting with alarm how hot the child's skin felt. Fever or just the heat? She couldn't be sure, and the uncertainty twisted her stomach into knots of fear. Daniel returned with a pitcher of water, 2 glasses, and a plate of sliced bread with butter. "Start slow," he cautioned, pouring water for them both. "Too much too quick will make you sick." Delilah helped Emma sit up and brought the water to her lips. The child drank greedily until Delilah pulled the glass away. "Small sips, darling." She took a sip herself, the cool water like heaven on her parched throat. Daniel watched them with careful eyes, and she felt a flicker of something embarrassment, perhaps, or shame at their condition. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if no need for that," he interrupted gently. "Anyone would have done the same." But Delilah knew better. They'd passed through towns where no one had spared them a second glance, where doors had closed in their faces when she'd sought work or shelter. A knock at the front door announced the doctor's arrival. Daniel excused himself, returning moments later with an older man carrying a leather medical bag. "Mrs. Harper, this is Dr. Williams," Daniel said. "Doc, this is Mrs. Delilah Harper and her daughter Emma." The doctor nodded kindly. "Mr. Morgan tells me you've had a rough journey. Let's have a look at you both." The examination was thorough but gentle. Dr. Williams checked Emma first, listening to her chest, feeling her pulse, examining her eyes and throat. "Dehydration and exhaustion, mostly," he concluded, mixing a powder into a glass of water. "This will help bring her fever down. Make sure she drinks plenty of fluids, but as Mr. Morgan said, not too quickly." He turned his attention to Delilah next, his weathered face creasing with concern as he examined her. "You're in worse shape than your daughter, Mrs. Harper." "When was the last time you ate properly?" Delilah looked away. "I made sure Emma had what food we had," the doctor sighed. "A mother's sacrifice, admirable, but you can't care for her if you collapse." He rummaged in his bag and produced another packet of powder. "Same instructions for you. Rest, fluids, and light food for the next day or two. Then gradually return to normal meals." After the doctor left, refusing payment from Daniel with a wave of his hand. "Put it on my account, Dan. You can settle up next time you're in town." Delilah found herself alone with their benefactor once more. Emma had fallen asleep, her breathing easier now, a bit of color returning to her cheeks. "Why are you doing this?" Delilah asked softly, watching Daniel as he set a fresh pitcher of water on the bedside table. He considered her question for a long moment. "My ma died on the trail when I was 12. Fever took her, same as your husband, I gather." His eyes met hers, direct but gentle. "Nobody stopped to help us. Pa and I buried her by the trail and kept moving. Always figured if I could prevent another child from watching their mother die, I would." The simple honesty of his answer brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "I'm sorry about your mother." Daniel nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy. "Get some rest, Mrs. Harper. We can talk more when you're feeling stronger." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You and your daughter are welcome to stay as long as you need. There's a spare bedroom next door for you once the little one's sleeping soundly." Before she could respond, he was gone, his bootfalls fading down the hallway. Delilah settled back against the pillow beside Emma, her mind whirling despite her exhaustion. They were safe, at least for now. fed and sheltered by a stranger's unexpected kindness. She should feel relief, she knew, but uncertainty nagged at her. What would come next? How long could they impose on this man's generosity? Tomorrow, she decided, closing her eyes. Tomorrow she would worry about the future. For now, with her daughter breathing peacefully beside her, she would allow herself this small respite from the hardship of the past months. Delilah woke disoriented, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was Emma? Before memory returned. She sat up quickly, wincing at the dizziness that followed the movement. Easy there. Daniel Morgan stood in the doorway, a tray in his hands. Your daughter's fine. She's in the kitchen, helping my housekeeper with breakfast. Girl has quite an appetite this morning, which the doc says is a good sign. Relief washed over Delilah. How long did I sleep? Nearly 14 hours. He set the tray on her lap, a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. You needed it. Delilah realized she was ravenous, but remembered the doctor's warning and forced herself to eat slowly. You have a housekeeper, Daniel nodded, taking a seat in a chair near the window. Mrs. Alvarez comes in 3 times a week. She's from one of the old Mexican families that were here before the Gadsden Purchase. Makes the best tamales you'll ever taste. As she ate, Delilah took stock of her surroundings. The room was plain but comfortable, a dresser of solid oak, simple curtains at the window, a rag rug on the plank floor. Like the rest of what she'd seen of the house, it spoke of practicality rather than luxury. Mr. Morgan, Daniel, please. Daniel, she amended. I can't thank you enough for your help, but we shouldn't impose further. If you could point us toward work in town, perhaps domestic service. His brow furrowed. Mrs. Harper, Delilah, she interrupted with a small smile. That earned her a grin that transformed his weathered face, making him look younger, boyish almost. Delilah, then. There's no need to rush off. Naco's a small town and work isn't easy to come by, especially with a child to care for. Stay a while, at least until you're both stronger. Before she could protest, Emma came running into the room, her face alight with excitement. Mama, Mr. Morgan has chickens, and Mrs. Alvarez let me collect the eggs, and she's teaching me Spanish words. Daniel rose, giving Delilah a look that suggested their conversation wasn't finished. I'll let you two catch up. I've got chores to tend to, but Mrs. Alvarez will be here until midday if you need anything. After he'd gone, Emma climbed onto the bed beside Delilah, chattering happily about the ranch and the kind housekeeper and the cat she'd discovered in the barn. It had been months since Delilah had seen her daughter so animated, and the sight eased something that had been tight and painful in her chest since Thomas's death. Is Mr. Morgan going to be our new papa? Emma asked suddenly, stopping Delilah's heart mid-beat. No, sweetheart. Mr. Morgan is just helping us until we can find our own way. He's being kind, that's all. Emma's face fell slightly. Oh, but I like it here. I know you do. Delilah stroked her daughter's hair. But we can't stay forever. Mr. Morgan has his own life. He looks lonely, Emma said with a child's directness, and he has the nicest smile when he looks at you. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Emma Harper, what an imagination you have. Now help me up. I should see about making myself useful while we're guests in this house. The next few days established a tentative routine. Delilah insisted on helping with household tasks, cooking when Mrs. Alvarez wasn't there, cleaning, mending clothes that Daniel had clearly been neglecting. He protested at first, but seemed to recognize her need to contribute, to not feel entirely dependent on his charity. Emma thrived in the open air and sunshine, following Daniel around as he worked, asking endless questions that he answered with remarkable patience. Delilah often found herself watching their interactions from a window or doorway, a complicated ache in her chest at the sight of her daughter's hand, trustingly placed in the cowboy's calloused one. On the fourth evening, after Emma had been put to bed, Daniel invited Delilah to join him on the porch. The night was cool, stars scattered like diamond dust across the dark velvet of the sky. He offered her a glass of lemonade, and they sat in companionable silence for a time. "You've been avoiding talking about what brought you here," Daniel said finally. "To Naco, I mean." Delilah sighed, watching the condensation bead on her glass. "There's not much to tell. My husband died of fever this past winter. The creditors took everything. I didn't even know how deeply in debt we were until after he was gone. My cousin Mary wrote that she could find me work in her husband's store here, but when we arrived, let me guess, the cousin wasn't as welcoming as her letter suggested. She wasn't here at all." Delilah's laugh held no humor. "They'd moved on to California months ago. Apparently she sent the letter before they decided to leave, and never thought to send another informing me of the change." Daniel swore softly under his breath, then immediately apologized. "That's a hard blow." It was. Delilah took a sip of her lemonade. "We had just enough money for a few nights at the boarding house, but when that ran out, well, you know the rest." He was quiet for a long moment. "What would you have done if I hadn't come along?" The question made her stomach clench. She'd asked herself the same thing during her darkest moments on the street. "Whatever I had to," she said finally, "to keep Emma safe and fed." Daniel nodded, understanding what she couldn't bring herself to say. In desperate times, desperate measures became thinkable, even for a respectable widow. "I have a proposition for you," he said, setting his glass down carefully. Not what you're thinking," he added quickly, a flush visible even in the dim light of the porch lantern. "A job offer of sorts." Delilah turned to face him fully. "What kind of job?" "This place needs a woman's touch. Mrs. Alvarez does what she can, but she has her own family to care for. I need someone to cook, keep house, maybe help with the accounts. I saw you looking over my ledger yesterday, and I reckon you noticed what a mess they are." She had indeed noticed, and had been silently appalled at his haphazard bookkeeping. "You're offering me a position as housekeeper, with room and board for you and Emma, plus wages." He hesitated. "I know it's not what you came west looking for, but it would give you time to get on your feet, save some money, and Emma seems happy here." It was a generous offer, far better than anything she was likely to find in town. Still, Delilah hesitated. People will talk. A widow living in a bachelor's home, even as an employee. Daniel's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "People always talk. But if it worries you, Mrs. Alvarez can chaperone when she's here, and I can have my friend Reverend Parker come to dinner regularly. He's always happy for a home-cooked meal." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I'm not asking for anything improper, Delilah. Just help running this place and maybe some company now and then. It gets lonely out here." The admission of loneliness touched her. She recognized it in herself, had felt it even before Thomas died, if she were honest. Their marriage had been one of convenience and mutual respect rather than passion, arranged by practical parents who valued stability over romance. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "It's a very kind offer." Daniel nodded, accepting her non-answer gracefully. "Take all the time you need. There's no rush." But as she lay awake that night, listening to Emma's soft breathing from the bed beside hers, Delilah knew there was indeed a rush. Their situation was precarious, balanced on the generosity of a man they barely knew. Yet something about Daniel Morgan inspired trust. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that reminded her of the mountains visible on the horizon, solid, dependable, enduring. By morning she had made her decision. "We'll stay," she told Daniel over breakfast, while Emma was outside feeding scraps to the barn cat. "At least for a while. But I insist on a proper employment agreement with clearly defined duties and fair wages." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains. "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll draw up terms this afternoon." And so they settled into a new rhythm. Delilah took over the running of the household, bringing order to what had clearly been a bachelor's domain for too long. She discovered Daniel was no slouch. The house was clean and well maintained, but there were 1,000 small touches missing that transformed a house into a home. She planted flowers by the front steps, hung curtains she'd sewn from fabric purchased on their first trip into town together, organized the pantry and kitchen to her liking. Daniel watched these changes with a mixture of amusement and approval, sometimes offering suggestions but mostly giving her free rein. Emma enrolled in the small school in Naco, riding in with Daniel when he went to town for supplies or business, and back with him in the afternoon. She flourished under the combination of education, fresh air, and stability, her nightmares about her father's death gradually fading. As summer ripened toward fall, Delilah found herself watching the sky each afternoon, awaiting the sight of the wagon returning with Daniel and Emma. She told herself it was merely concern for her daughter, but knew it wasn't entirely true. Somewhere along the way, Daniel Morgan had become more than an employer, more than a benefactor. He had become a friend, perhaps the first true friend she'd had since childhood. They fell into the habit of sitting on the porch after Emma was asleep, talking about their days, their pasts, their hopes for the future. Daniel spoke of his time fighting for the Union in the war, of coming west afterward seeking a fresh start, of building his modest ranch into something that, while not making him wealthy, provided a decent living. Delilah told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a shopkeeper who believed education was important even for girls. About meeting Thomas when he came to buy fabric for his mother, about their courtship and marriage, their move west to Kansas, where land was cheaper. "Did you love him?" Daniel asked one night, then immediately shook his head. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." Delilah stared out at the darkened landscape. "I respected him. He was a good man, kind in his way, though not demonstrative. We were comfortable together." She glanced at Daniel. "Not every marriage is a grand passion," he nodded slowly. "I was engaged once before the war. Elizabeth was her name, pretty girl, daughter of my father's business partner." A shadow crossed his face. "She couldn't wait for me. Married a man who paid his way out of service. I came home to find her with a husband and a baby on the way." "I'm sorry," Delilah said softly. Daniel shrugged. "It was a long time ago, probably for the best, though it didn't feel like it at the time." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "What about you? Have you thought about marrying again?" The question caught her off guard. No, not really. After Thomas died, survival was my only concern, and now, he prompted when she fell silent. "Now I'm finding my feet again, learning to stand on my own." She offered a small smile. "One step at a time." October brought cooler temperatures and the town harvest festival. Daniel insisted they all attend, dressing in his Sunday best, a clean black suit that made his shoulders look broader than ever, his blue eyes more striking against the dark fabric. Delilah wore her one good dress, a deep green that she'd carefully altered to fit her now healthier frame. Emma had a new dress as well, purchased with Delilah's first wages, and she twirled to make the skirt flare as they prepared to leave. "You both look beautiful," Daniel said, his voice oddly rough as he helped them into the wagon. The festival was alive with music, food, and laughter. Colorful bunting decorated the town square, and tables groaned under the weight of dishes brought by families from miles around. Delilah contributed an apple pie that quickly disappeared, much to her satisfaction. She was introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Naco, learning names she immediately forgot in the flurry of handshakes and smiles. People were welcoming, curious about the widow who had taken up residence at the Morgan Ranch, but not overtly judgmental as she'd feared. "Daniel's a good man," more than one person told her. "About time he had some happiness in that house." The comment made her blush, but she didn't correct the assumption. It was easier, somehow, to let people believe what they would. As the sun set, lanterns were lit and a fiddler struck up a lively tune. Couples formed on the makeshift dance floor, a cleared area of packed earth in the center of the square. "May I have this dance?" Daniel appeared at her side, hand extended, eyes questioning. Delilah hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'm out of practice," she warned. His smile was warm. "So am I. We can be rusty together." The dance was a simple reel, nothing complicated, but Delilah's heart raced at the feel of Daniel's hand at her waist, his other clasping hers as they moved in time to the music. He was a better dancer than he'd claimed, leading her confidently through the steps. As the music slowed into a waltz, he drew her closer. "Is this all right?" he asked softly, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "Yes," she whispered, allowing herself to melt a fraction more into his embrace. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, her skirts brushing against his legs, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. Delilah was acutely aware of the eyes on them, the town watching, drawing conclusions, likely already spreading gossip, but found she didn't care. For this moment, in the circle of Daniel's arms, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever, a sense of rightness, of belonging. The spell was broken when Emma ran up, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. "Can I dance too, please?" Daniel laughed and swept the girl up into his arms. "Of course you can, Miss Emma. Your mother won't mind sharing me for one dance, will you, Delilah?" She shook her head, watching with a full heart as Daniel twirled her daughter around the dance floor, Emma's delighted giggles rising above the music. This man, who had no obligation to them, had opened not just his home but his heart to her child. The realization struck her with unexpected force, bringing tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. The ride home was quiet, Emma falling asleep against Daniel's side on the wagon seat, Delilah lost in thought as she gazed at the star-filled sky. Something had shifted between them tonight, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The knowledge both thrilled and terrified her. At the ranch, Daniel carried Emma to her bed, waiting in the hallway while Delilah changed the sleepy child into her nightgown. When she emerged, closing the door softly behind her, he was still there, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the oil lamp. "Delilah," he said, his voice low. "I need to say something, and I want you to hear me out before you respond." Her pulse quickened. "All right. These past months, having you and Emma here, it's been the happiest time I can remember since before the war." He took a deep breath. "I know we started with me as your employer, and I want you to know that if what I'm about to say isn't what you want, nothing has to change. You and Emma will always have a place here, regardless." Daniel, he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish or I might lose my nerve." Another breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Delilah Harper. Maybe I started falling that very first day in town, when you were trying so hard to be strong for your daughter despite everything. I admire your courage, your kindness, the way you've made this house feel like a real home for the first time." Delilah's breath caught in her throat. The words she'd both hoped for and feared hung in the air between them. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," Daniel continued. "I know your life has been upended enough already, and the last thing I want is to pressure you." but I wanted you to know how I feel. And if, someday, you might consider me as more than your employer, more than a friend, I'd be the happiest man in the Arizona Territory." The lump in her throat made it hard to speak. Part of her wanted to throw caution to the winds, to tell him that she too had developed feelings that went far beyond friendship or gratitude. But another part, the cautious widow who had learned the hard way that life could be cruel and unpredictable, held back. "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. Daniel's smile was gentle, understanding. "You don't need to say anything right now, just think about it." He hesitated, then bent and pressed a soft, brief kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Delilah." He was gone before she could respond, retreating to his room at the end of the hall, leaving her standing there with her fingertips pressed to the spot his lips had touched, her mind and heart in turmoil. The next morning brought awkwardness, both of them overly polite, careful not to touch when they reached for the coffee pot at the same time. Emma, perceptive as always, looked between them with narrowed eyes but said nothing. They maintained this careful distance for 3 days, until a thunderstorm swept in from the mountains, bringing with it wind and rain fierce enough to drive them all indoors by mid-afternoon. Emma sat at the kitchen table working on her school lessons while Delilah kneaded dough for bread, the familiar motion helping to calm her jangled nerves. Daniel had been in town on business but returned as the storm intensified, bursting through the door with his hat and coat streaming water. "Quite a gully washer out there," he said, hanging his dripping garments by the door. "Creeks rising fast. Might flood the low pasture if this keeps up." Delilah handed him a towel for his wet hair. "You're soaked through. You should change before you catch cold." Their fingers brushed as he took the towel, and neither pulled away immediately. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, connected by that small point of contact, until Emma's voice broke the spell. "Mr. Morgan, can you help me with this arithmetic problem?" Mama tried, but she got confused on the carrying part. Daniel's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Did she now? Well, let's see what we can do." He spent the next hour at the table with Emma, patiently working through her lessons while Delilah finished the bread and started on dinner. The domesticity of the scene wasn't lost on her, the three of them sheltered from the storm, working together, like a real family. The thought brought both warmth and a renewed surge of uncertainty. What if she opened her heart to Daniel, only to lose him as she'd lost Thomas? What if he changed his mind about wanting a ready-made family? What if a tremendous crash of thunder shook the house, making them all jump? Emma let out a small cry of fear, and Daniel immediately put his arm around her shoulders. "Just the sky having a conversation with the earth," he said reassuringly. "Nothing to be afraid of." "I don't like storms," Emma whispered, pressing closer to his side. "Papa died during a storm." Delilah froze at the sink, dish towel clutched in suddenly white-knuckled hands. Emma rarely spoke of her father's death. Daniel's voice was gentle. "That's a hard memory to carry, Miss Emma. I'm sorry." "He was sick for a long time," Emma continued, looking down at her slate. "The doctor came, but he couldn't make Papa better." Mama cried, and there was thunder, and then Papa was gone. She looked up at Daniel, her small face serious. "Are you going to go away too?" The question hung in the air, loaded with more meaning than the child could possibly understand. Daniel's eyes met Delilah's across the room, something deep and unspoken passing between them. "No, Emma," he said firmly, still holding Delilah's gaze. "I'm not going anywhere, not unless your mama wants me to." The storm raged on through the night, rain lashing the windows, wind howling around the eaves of the house. Delilah lay awake, Daniel's words echoing in her mind. "Not unless your mama wants me to." The ball was in her court, she realized. He had declared himself, and now waited for her to do the same. but did she know her own heart? The attraction was undeniable, the growing affection real. Yet fear held her back, fear of dependency, of loss, of opening herself to pain again. A particularly violent gust rattled the window frame and Emma stirred beside her. "Mama, are you awake?" "Yes, darling, it's all right, just the wind." Emma sat up, her nightgown ghostly in the darkness. "I was thinking about what Mr. Morgan said, about not going away." "Were you?" "Yes." Emma's voice was thoughtful. "I think he wants to be my new papa, and I think that would be nice." The simple acceptance in her daughter's voice brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "Do you? You wouldn't mind? I miss Papa, but he's in heaven now. And Mr. Morgan is here, and he's kind, and he makes you smile again." Emma lay back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "I like when you smile, Mama." Delilah stroked her daughter's hair until her breathing deepened into sleep, while the storm gradually subsided outside, leaving only the gentle patter of rain on the roof. Morning dawned clear and fresh, the air washed clean by the storm. Delilah rose early, dressing with particular care, and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. To her surprise, Daniel was already there, coffee brewing on the stove. "Couldn't sleep," he explained, pouring her a cup. "Thought I'd get an early start." Delilah accepted the coffee, gathering her courage. "Daniel, about what you said the other night," he held up a hand. "You don't have to answer now. I meant what I said about not pressuring you." "I know." She set her cup down and took a step closer to him. "But I've been thinking, and—" "I'm afraid," his brow furrowed. "Of me?" "No," she shook her head quickly. "Of feeling again, of losing again, of depending on someone else for my happiness, my security." She took a deep breath. "When Thomas died, I realized how vulnerable I was, how little control I had over my own fate. I don't want to be in that position again." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're afraid of needing me in case something happens." Yes, the admission cost her, but it felt right to be honest. And yet. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "And yet I find myself thinking of you when you're not there, looking forward to our conversations, watching how gentle you are with Emma, and feeling something I never expected to feel again." She met his gaze directly. "I'm falling in love with you too, Daniel Morgan. It terrifies me, but it's the truth." The joy that transformed his face made her heart skip. "Delilah," he breathed, reaching for her hands. "I don't know what the future holds. Nobody does. But I promise you this: as long as I have breath in my body, I will do everything in my power to make sure you and Emma never have to worry about your security again. Not as your protector or provider, but as your partner." Partner, the word resonated with her. Yes. Equal partners, building something together. His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "I don't want a wife who's dependent on me. I want a woman who stands beside me, who challenges me when I'm wrong, who shares the work and the rewards of this life." It was as if he had reached inside and read her deepest desires. Not to be taken care of, but to be valued as a contributor, an equal. "In that case, Daniel Morgan," she said, her voice gaining strength, "I accept your offer of partnership. In all things." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, then deepened as she responded, her hands moving to his shoulders, his arms encircling her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Delilah felt as if something fundamental had shifted within her, a door long closed now standing open, letting in light and air. "Does this mean Mr. Morgan is going to be my papa now?" Emma's voice came from the doorway, making them both start and then laugh. Daniel crouched down to the child's eye level. "Would you like that, Emma, if I asked your mama to marry me?" Emma considered this solemnly. "Would we still live here with the chickens and the cat?" Yes, of course. And would you teach me to ride a horse? A real one, not just sitting in front of you on old Pete. Daniel's eyes crinkled. When you're a bit bigger, yes, I promise. Emma nodded decisively. Then I think you should marry Mama. She needs someone to take care of her sometimes, even though she says she doesn't. Delilah felt a blush heat her cheeks as Daniel glanced up at her, amusement and tenderness mingling in his gaze. Your daughter is very wise for her age, he said, rising to his feet. She gets that from her father, Delilah said softly, then reached for Emma's hand. Sweetheart, I need you to understand something. If Mr. Morgan and I were to marry, he wouldn't be replacing your papa. Thomas Harper will always be your father and will always keep his memory alive. Emma nodded again. I know, Mama, but I think Papa would want us to be happy. He always said that when I was sad. Out of the mouths of babes, Delilah thought, blinking back sudden tears. Yes, he did say that, and he was right. Daniel cleared his throat. Well, this isn't exactly how I planned to do this, but... He took Delilah's hands in his again. Delilah Harper, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? You and Emma have brought light back into my life, and I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you place in me. Looking into his earnest blue eyes, Delilah felt the last of her reservations melt away. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you, Daniel Morgan. His whoop of joy startled a laugh from her, and then she was in his arms, being spun around the kitchen while Emma clapped and giggled. When he set her down, he kissed her again, quickly but with a promise of more to come that made her toes curl in her slippers. We should go to town today, he said. Speak to Reverend Parker, make arrangements, unless you want to wait. Delilah shook her head. No more waiting. We've both waited long enough for happiness, don't you think? His smile was answer enough. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church in Naco. Delilah in a new dress of pale blue silk that Daniel had ordered specially from Tucson. Emma serving as her maid of honor in a matching dress that made her look older than her 8 years. The entire town turned out for the celebration. The women bringing food, the men slapping Daniel on the back with congratulations and good-natured teasing. After the ceremony, as they stood receiving well wishes from the townsfolk, the Reverend's wife approached with a knowing smile. I told Daniel months ago that he should settle down with a good woman, she said, squeezing Delilah's hands. When he brought you two into town for the harvest festival, I knew you were the one. The way he looked at you when you weren't watching like a man who's found water after crossing the desert. The description brought a blush to Delilah's cheeks. We're very fortunate to have found each other, she said simply. Mrs. Parker patted her hand. It's more than fortune, my dear. It's providence. Looking around at the gathering, her new husband deep in conversation with the blacksmith, Emma playing with the other children, the women setting out a feast that would feed the entire town, Delilah was inclined to agree. The journey that had begun in desperation, with hunger and fear as her only companions, had led her to this moment of abundance and joy. Later, as they danced under the stars, Daniel held her close, his cheek against her hair. Happy, Mrs. Morgan, he murmured. The name, her new name, still felt strange but welcome, like a gift she was slowly unwrapping. Very happy, Mr. Morgan, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Good, because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. It was a promise he kept faithfully through the years that followed. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Delilah's practical business sense complementing Daniel's knowledge of cattle and land. They added to their herd, improved the house, and hired help as they could afford it. Emma grew from a child into a young woman, excelling in her studies and eventually teaching at the town school. She never forgot Thomas Harper, keeping a small portrait of him by her bedside, but she came to love Daniel as a father, taking his name legally on her 16th birthday as a gift to him. And in the spring of their second year of marriage, Delilah presented Daniel with a son, a robust baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. They named him James Thomas Morgan, honoring both Daniel's father and Delilah's first husband. 2 years later, a daughter followed Sarah Elizabeth, named for both their mothers. The house that had once echoed with the loneliness of a solitary man now rang with children's laughter and the everyday sounds of a family going about their lives together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel took Delilah back to the spot in town where they'd first met, the hitching post outside the general store. The town had grown over the decade, with new buildings and businesses sprouting up along the main street, but the store remained largely unchanged. "Do you remember?" he asked, standing with her in the exact spot where she had stumbled against the post that fateful day. "How could I forget?" Delilah's eyes grew distant with memory. "I was so desperate, so afraid, I thought I was at the end of my rope. And I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, even half-starved and exhausted." Daniel took her hand, now adorned with a simple gold band. "I knew the moment you looked at me with those fierce mama bear eyes, ready to protect your cub despite your own hunger, that you were someone special." Delilah smiled, squeezing his hand. "I thought you were some kind of mirage at first, too good to be true. And now—" He pulled her closer, ignoring the amused glances of passers-by. "Now I know better." She leaned into him, comfortable in his embrace after a decade of marriage. "You're not perfect, Daniel Morgan. You leave your boots in the middle of the floor, you spoil the children shamelessly, and you still can't keep your ledgers straight without my help." He laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest against her ear. "All true, and yet you love me anyway." "I do." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her and her daughter from starvation, who had offered them not just food and shelter but a future built on mutual respect and affection. "With all my heart." As they walked back toward the wagon where Emma waited with her younger siblings, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The grief and loss that had seemed like an ending had, in fact, been the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with more joy than she could have imagined in those dark days after Thomas's death. Life on the frontier was never easy. There were droughts and difficult winters, illnesses and injuries, the 1,000 natural challenges of carving out a living from the land. But there was also the deep satisfaction of building something lasting together, of raising children in a home filled with love and laughter, of growing old beside a partner who valued her mind as much as her heart. That night, after the children were asleep, Delilah and Daniel sat on the porch of their home as they had so many evenings before, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against him, the simple comfort of touch that had become as essential as breathing. 10 years, Daniel mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you and Emma came into my life. Other times I can hardly remember what it was like before you were here, lonely from what you've told me. Delilah traced patterns on his palm with her fingertip. For both of us, not anymore. He kissed the top of her head. Never again. As the night deepened around them, Delilah thought about the two desperate, hungry people who had stood on a dusty street a decade ago, she with nothing to offer but her willingness to work. He with an empty house and a heart open to possibility. How far they had come from that moment of chance encounter, how much they had built together. "I love you, Daniel Morgan," she said softly. "Thank you for feeding us that day, for asking us to stay." His arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made, thank you for saying yes." In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound floating across the darkness like a benediction. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved, protected, cherished. And on the porch, Delilah and Daniel held each other close, their shared history a foundation for all the years still to come. The hunger that had once clawed at Delilah's insides was now just a distant memory, replaced by a different kind of hunger for life, for joy, for the future they would continue to build together, day by day, under the vast and endless sky.